So, it's no secret that I think Mega Man X7 is one of the worst games I've ever played. If you want a full breakdown on why, you can catch my video from 2022 that tore the game to shreds. Mega Man X7 is not a game that usually comes up alongside the likes of Superman 64 or whatever when people bring up the worst games ever, but I think X7 is definitely bad enough to be endlessly dissected for how it dropped the ball. Slow, clunky gameplay, controls that don't feel even a fraction as good as any other Mega Man X game, bad pacing, poor production values, abysmal optimization with long loading screens, an incredibly lackluster story, and really everything under the sun that could make a game not fun to play is something Mega Man X7 is guilty of. Of all the Mega Man games that players might actually play, this one is definitely one of, if not the worst. So no, I'm not counting obscure crap when I say that. But of course, if you're familiar with Mega Man, you already know X7's a doo-doo disc. But for a long time, that's where the discussion ended. In the year 2024, a lone developer decided that wasn't good enough and ventured to fix Mega Man X7. Introducing X7 Ends Edition. Mega Man ROM hacks are not new in the least bit. Improvement projects are also not new to the Mega Man X series specifically. I've spent years raving about Mega Man X3 The Zero Project, a great hack that fully realizes X3 and brings up to par with X1, 2, and 4, even though I love the original X3 as much as those anyway. X5 and X6 also have different improvement projects out, and I've talked about some of them in the past. The person who did this X7 patch we're talking about today also did one for X5 and X6. But you can make a whole video about Mega Man X ROM hacks, and I might just do that at some point, so I'll stay on target. I love a good fix-it project. Fan developers taking a game in a series that might not be ideal and trying to improve them into something better is an admirable act. To be specific, one of my favorite games ever made is a fan-made improvement project, Project Sonic 06. Don't care if it's fan-made or based on a crappy, unfinished game, it's one of the most fun and satisfying 3D platforming experiences I've yet had. But then, this is also Mega Man X7. If you asked me before this came out if I thought you could make this even work for X7, I'd probably say no. As I said in the intro, I think X7 is one of the assiest games I've ever played. Many issues are baked into the final product without a lot of wiggle room to mix it up with what was there, like PO6 had, but I figured I'd give the patch a shot for a video nevertheless, and after doing a full playthrough of Mega Man X7 Ends Edition, I have to say, I'm impressed. Before we go any further, I should say, if you're interested in this, it's only playable on the PS2 emulator PCSX2. In order to play the patch, you need an ISO file for Mega Man X7, the procurement of which is entirely on you. I cannot provide you with that, nor can anyone else. Once you have that and the emulator set up and configured to your liking, you need to download the patch from the announcement video. It's a link in the description of his video, which I will link in the description of this video. And you need to use the Delta patch tool you can find on romhacking.net, and from there it's a simple 1-2 done setup of applying the patch to the ISO. It is not compatible with the Mega Man X Legacy Collection on PC or any other console. But with that out of the way, we can get into the game properly. One of X7's biggest crimes is its dreadfully slow pacing, and if I were to say what almost all the major changes from Ends Edition are, they would be related to speed and pacing. Real-time cutscenes couldn't be skipped in this game, but one of the first things I noticed with the patch is that you can fast forward through the real-time cutscenes. It's not an outright skip button, but it makes the scenes go by significantly quicker, keeping you in the action far more. Also making the scenes kind of remind me of SA2 with how the characters talk over each other when you fast forward through the scenes, which was pretty funny.
Wait a second.
Are you stupid?
Are you...
Incident? What are you talking about? Oh, here it comes. Zombie seeing ya!
Unfortunately, nothing was done about the auditory torture that can occasionally emerge while playing X7, so Flame Hyanard's boss fight and Alia's calls will still be a bother. But back to the pacing, the menu design of X7 was another huge contributor to its slow pace. Like how you were introduced to the Maverick bosses and their levels, with each character of text going by at the speed of molasses. This can be sped up in the patched version. In the original, you'd rescue the 16 Reploids in each stage and have to see their names slowly appear on this list one by one. Now it occurs in about 1 second. This is the kind of thing that's just such a no-brainer that you can't possibly conceive of how it got like this in the original release of the game. And speaking of rescuable Reploids, in the original game you have to save 64 of them to unlock Mega Man X as a playable character. This is, at minimum, 4 stages, half of the game before playing as the title character. In the new edition, you need to only rescue 32 of them. This sounds like a lot, but I just did Ride Borsky first and then Vanishing Gungaroo and got 32 of them that way, and thus I unlocked Mega Man X within 2 stages and got to playing as him. It really feels a lot better paced this way. Nabbing every rescuable Reploid is also less troublesome because they can take multiple hits before dying, so the do or die component of this system isn't as bad as it was in the OG X7. Then upgrades like the heart tanks go to all 3 characters as well, so you don't have to worry about any character being at a disadvantage if you don't play as them as often. Something I noticed when Axel's health bar was the same size as X and Zero, despite the fact that I hadn't played as him in a while. Another sizable issue with X7 was just the way it handled. Sometimes doing basic actions like wall jumping would be super janky as the characters would get stuck to the wall. N's Edition doesn't outright fix it, but it's much easier to perform those classic moves. When getting hit in X7, you'd fall over and need to wait for the character to get up. This wasn't removed either because one of the perks of X's glide armor is that it protects him from this, but for Zero, Axel, and X without the armor, getting up is much faster, which again greatly benefits the pace of the game. All of the attacks are much quicker too. Zero's Saber combo has the delay between attacks significantly reduced, so he's much more fun to play as now, quickly shredding enemies. And he can now turn in midair after a slash. Axel's copy shot is much more viable now because charging it up takes way less time, and bullet sponge enemies are a lot easier to deal with. Take these walls with targets on them as an example. Blasting through them doesn't take too long, so you barely notice them. And this goes for mini-bosses too. In Radio Tower, the mini-boss just goes on and on and on in the original because it has so much health and spends much of the fight completely impervious to damage. In N's Edition, the spin cycle is way faster, and I cleared it after the first cycle of invulnerability. This effect also goes for bosses, which have all been improved. The biggest issue with most X7 bosses is that the designer's solution to having 2 characters teamed up at all times was to give bosses these huge health bars and to make the damage output really low. Combine that with lengthy invincibility frames and the result is some pretty rancid battles. Bosses have been adjusted on a case-by-case basis. A battle like Soldier Stone Kong or Ride Borsky were so boring because of the issues I just laid out. So they were fixed by receiving more damage from your basic attacks and having less health. But then a battle like Splash Warfly could be defeated in record time compared to the rest. This boss is more difficult now because he didn't just dive in the water and re-emerge to just be hit by the weakness again. He sent missiles after me, which forced me to jump to the other platforms. Surprising me, since I was staying on my toes during an X7 boss I always thought was easy. Though, looking back on the trailer description, this might also be because I didn't use his new weakness. I didn't even realize this before playing, but the developer altered the boss weakness chain and listed the new one in the description. It now goes Soldier Stone Kong, Tornado Tunyon, Flame Hyanard, Splash Warfly, Snipe Anteater, Wind Crowrang, Vanishing Gungaroo, and Ride Borsky. God, these are the stupidest Mavericks in series history, but you work with what you got. The special weapons have all been made more powerful and practical, like the Gaia Shield destroying smaller enemies immediately, or the other weapons just doing more damage. But I still didn't really use them much. X7 is like many of the later X games in that the X-Buster and the Z-Saber were so powerful on their own that special weapons hardly ever seemed worth the trouble of learning their strats, and you could just spam charge shots and do a lot of damage. Especially in a game like X7 with such precise lock-on for X and Axel. But still, the weapons are more usable in N's Edition than they ever were in the OG game. Obviously, this patch changes a lot of stuff, but instead of highlighting every little detail in depth, I'll rapid-fire some of the rest. Item pickups like heart tanks and sub-tanks make a much more audible sound, so you won't be left wondering if you got it or not. Annoying pickups like the heart and air forces have been moved so that they don't give as much of a hassle as they used to. Camera sections that used a bizarre bird's eye view have been given a more zoomed out camera angle, and then some sections that had a cramped camera angle give you a bird's eye view, which would actually help. I was stunned at the results screen when my Hunter rank went up for the first time. This was a mechanic in X5 through X8, and in most of those games I never even knew what it was for. In X6, I knew your rank was tied to how many Nightmare Souls you collected, which contributed to how many parts you could equip, but in the other games I couldn't tell you what it actually did. In X7, I never paid it any mind because the rank was always low anyway. So when I was going from a C rank to a GA or PA Hunter, I had to consult the Mega Man Wiki just to find out what that even meant. It's just a mark to show how many enemies you defeated versus how much damage you took. Funny to know that the original game considered my performance pretty piss poor most of the time. So by the finale I was already pretty impressed, but all that was left was playing the final 2 stages. If you watched my Mega Man X levels ranked video, you'd know that the last levels of X7, Palace Road and Crimson Palace, were both in the bottom 3. Crimson Palace ranked at the absolute bottom. It turns out fixing Palace Road is pretty simple. Just make the thing chasing you move at a pace where you won't fall asleep while playing. Yeah, that's the big change, and it made the stage feel totally different. I actually felt like I had to stay on my toes during this level or else. Shocking concept. And then Crimson Palace still suffers from many of the same issues, like this being the only level to even do the most basic of platforming, and it having way too much content for its own good. But with all the other changes in place, you can breeze through the regular segments, the boss with Red, the boss rush, and the final battle with Sigma without much hassle emerging from it. The final phase of Sigma noticeably having much less health than he used to. In the end, N's Edition took me about 2 hours to beat. My most recent playthrough of X7 for that ranking video last year took me 3 hours and 39 minutes. It's the exact same game with so many adjustments to the pacing of it that it knocked an entire hour and 40 minutes off the runtime, which was all fluff, cutscenes, and other garbage. But with all that said, does N's Edition fix Mega Man X7? Well, that depends on your definition of fixed. If you're hoping for this to turn X7 into the next game to rival Mega Man X1 or X4 in quality, this just won't do it. Mega Man X7 N's Edition is a patch designed by a singular person that is working within the confines of the original work. Yeah, it still has awful voice acting and shitty cutscenes. The level design is still very basic and doesn't do much platforming until the very end. Item placement is usually on the obvious and repetitive side. Many boss fights are fixed by simply making them quicker and easier. It is still designed to where you need to lock on in 2D because that's just the game, etc, etc, etc. Something like PO6 was made from scratch, so you can just make the gameplay way more fun in whatever way the team wants and can make small changes to the level design as well. A luxury this patch does not have, so the patch doesn't fundamentally fix a lot of the core issues with X7, but when keeping in mind what this patch is, I'm very impressed by it. When just looking at the gameplay experience, I'd still play most any other X game over this, but N's Edition takes a game I'd give an E or an F if I felt like being harsh, to a game I'd consider worthy of a C-. It has enough core issues to where a D grade is still fair, but I thought the experience I had with it was pretty pleasant. Which is how I usually view games I give a C, as in it's got problems, maybe even a lot of problems, but I didn't not enjoy the experience. What I'm trying to say is, it's got many issues, sure, but what was done with the core experience makes X7 a much more fast-paced, satisfying game than it ever was before. If this was the X7 we got in 2003, I would consider it a perfectly harmless game. The worst X game, but not the dismal failure I think the original game was, because the patch just fixed the really dumb stuff that did nothing but drag the pace down. Perhaps your fondness for this patch will depend on how much you already like Mega Man X games, though. But as someone who loves a good X game like nothing else, I thought it was a lot of fun to run through X7 in a new, enhanced way, and I wouldn't be against playing it again someday. I even did 2 playthroughs of it for the video. So, your mileage may vary on how much you enjoy it, but the project absolutely has thumbs up from me. But that just about covers this. However, I'm not done with Mega Man X fan stuff yet, because next up I want to talk about the 16-bit X8 demake that got a new demo released a few months ago. So I hope you look forward to that. But in the meantime, I'll close by saying what I always do. If you made it this far into the video, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.